This found object mosaic tutorial will walk you through the basics of how to make a mosaic and grout it, and also how to use sentimental found objects to tell the story of an important event in your life. My found object mosaic is all about my trip to Portugal, and I'll be using really cool objects that I brought along the way. If you love learning about art, hit that subscribe button and support this public school teacher's side hustle. The first step is having a surface. I will be using a piece of wood. You can do this on brick, on ceramics. You can do this on a piece of cement. There's so many options, but we're doing a relief sculpture on a piece of wood. And now I'm assembling my found objects. I will be using lots of pieces of glass and your typical mosaic materials, but the theme of my mosaic artwork is my trip to Portugal. And so I have collected some keepsakes and some objects that will represent the experiences that I had, in addition to your traditional pieces of glass, stone, and that sort of thing. So the first thing is picking out what you want your mosaic to be about, and then looking at the materials and seeing how they work together. Many of these objects are very precious to me, and some of them are simply things I printed off the internet, like a map of Portugal, and any glass pieces you can buy at any craft store. And I'll link all the materials I used in the description box. These are wheeled tile nippers. Yes, you heard me right. And you'll definitely need some safety glasses because when cutting glass, you definitely want to protect your eye. Another trick is to cut your pieces in a Ziploc bag. That not only protects your eyes, but it keeps your pieces organized and from flying across the room. The next step, and maybe the most important one, is planning your composition. A mosaic is an assemblage of small pieces that then make a whole image. And if you don't want it to be a hot mess express, you need to have a sketch and a plan before you start gluing things down. If you're working with a material like clay or wire, you can kind of wing it because the material is a lot more forgiving and not as permanent. The glue we are using will stick your tiles forever. I did a mosaic with students outdoors on a brick wall. That was about 14 years ago, and it is still holding up to all the crazy South Carolina weather. So having a game plan is key. Now, composition refers to the arrangements of the elements in a work of art. Some things to think about when planning your composition is most of the time, this might be an abstract work of art. So you're thinking about shapes and colors and not like representing like a person's face. Can you represent a person's face? Absolutely. And you can see I'm sketching out waves here because I want this contrast in my composition of land versus sea. I recommend having at least one curved shape, as you see me have here. You need a variety of large, medium, and small areas and shapes. Definitely think about an area of emphasis or a focal point. I'm doing that right now with my beautiful bird necklace that my sister gave me, and I'll talk more about the significance of this. And I want to highlight with the eye. I want my eye to curve down, and then not that tile of Portugal is not going to catch your eye because it's super big, but I want the tile of Portugal to be the focal point or area of emphasis, and this bird really helps accentuate that point. Now, I want to balance out with these larger shapes that I have because, again, I want a variety of large, medium, and small shapes. And if the only large shape was that tile that says Portugal, it would be a little visually unbalanced. So these are really big shapes, but they're clear, so I think that should visually balance. The beauty is I don't have to make any decisions until everything is glued down. I'm going to trace those shapes so I know where they belong and how they interact with each other. And my game plan here is to use a collage technique using Mod Podge. Because the tiles will be clear, you'll see all the beautiful images that I will collage through the glass, and that's a really cool technique. Let's start with the basics here, and I want this right-hand side to represent the ocean because the ocean is so important to Portugal. With my tile nipper, you line it up, so if you want a horizontal cut, you cut it horizontally. If you want a diagonal cut, like I just did, you line the wheel of the tile nipper at a diagonal. It's very important to think about your corners and edges. I usually recommend to start with an edge or a corner in either the overall background or in a shape. Okay, you can see how when you cut in the bag, the tiles fly everywhere, the glass, and then the bag contains it. Now, you can't see my face, but I am wearing safety goggles, and I force my students to do it because you only get one shot at ruining your eyesight. So we want to make sure that you're not, having glass shards flying across the room, and you never know who's sitting next to you also. But this Ziploc bag really solves a lot of those problems. So a lot of times my students just want to glue down the whole pieces without breaking them up. Let me remind you, a mosaic is taking small pieces, small fragments to create a whole image. So I recommend never just having one big piece. There are a few exceptions to that, which I will kind of talk about once we get there. But your main areas, yes, you might use the whole piece of glass or tile, but it needs to be cut at least once because the negative space, or the part that isn't the glass or tile, is just as important as the positive space, which is the beautiful, colorful tiles and found objects. I'm using this really great glue, and it's awesome. I'll put the link in the description box, and I'm going to start with my corner piece. This will allow me to have control, and as I move towards the inside of my composition, I have a really clear sense of geometry. So having like geometric shapes in combination with curved lines and organic shapes is also a really great visual key to composition. You can see when you glue it down that you have to then kind of move it. And one thing that you want to keep in mind is you don't want the negative space to be too far apart, and you don't want the negative space to be too close together. You do need space for the grout to get into all the nitty-gritty, and you'll see the grouting process at the very end of the video. I have done it several ways. What works best for my brain is to cut a bunch of pieces in my bag, have a color scheme, and have lots of options to choose from, just like putting together a puzzle. I don't cut each piece and arrange it and then glue it. I just cut a whole bunch, have a little section next to me. That works best for me. Now, I have plenty of students that are not like that, and they're gonna wanna plan every single piece, and the colors and lines have to match up perfectly. And hey, that makes for great artists, but it's just not what works best for me. So here I go, taking the pieces that have the color scheme I want, those beautiful blues and turquoises that remind me of the gorgeous Atlantic Ocean, the beautiful seas of Portugal that I was able to explore when visiting last summer. So let's speed things up here. I'm gonna cut lots of pieces in the bag so I don't hurt myself or others, and so I have a nice sense of organization. It's very satisfying, that clipping sound. And these tile nippers are $25 a piece. They're excellent, but if you have a budget like me, if you're a teacher, I can't afford to have one per student. So this also helps if you're doing this in a classroom setting, because some students can use the tile nippers and cut them into small pieces, and then other students can glue the pieces that they have, and then you can kind of take turns using those materials. Now that I have a good variety of colors, shapes, and sizes, I'm going to begin or continue puzzle piecing my way down the right-hand side of my wave. I would like my wave to kind of just be random moments of blue and green. I'm not trying to do like a progression of value or color or anything like that. And this is such the fun, rewarding part. Play some music, get in the zone. It's like putting together a puzzle that you get to decide the ending of. And I just put down a piece, and then you will get glue on your fingers. So one trick is to use a pencil or anything that you can kind of push the tiles, because they'll wiggle around a little bit once you have the glue, and the glue is kind of annoying to get on your fingers and fingernails. So that's a little trick you'll see me do as well. This is kind of a fun piece here. And what's something to keep in mind is I want my right-hand side on that hard edge. I want to keep that geometric structure. That straight line is very important to my composition. But in contrast, the curved line on the right-hand side is also important to my composition. So I really am trying to think, follow the curve on the left-hand side and keep the structure on the right-hand side. That is important. I have this kind of clear little triangular piece here, and it's just a really fun opportunity to play around with color, texture, and shape. I'm going to continue with this exact same thought process, this exact same technique, and enjoy watching. I'm not going to edit this out because I think it's important. I'm not going to time lapse it because I think it's important, but I don't really have anything else to say. Now, I'm going to use Mod Podge to create a collage of some important images. A collage is an assemblage or an assembling of two-dimensional elements like photographs, pictures, drawings, and for example, here I'm using a map of Lisbon that I've just randomly torn. With the Mod Podge, I like it because you can use a paintbrush to apply to the surface and then put a layer on top to create a glossy clear coat. That dries, I'll put clear glass on top of that to create a really beautiful collage effect. What I'm collaging now is the name of the beautiful Airbnb that me and my husband stayed at on the Atlantic Ocean. It was epic. And so I kept one of the little business cards because it's such an important reminder of this trip, and I love the handwriting and just that blue flow. And then I'm going to use some of these papers that I made. These are just random papers I had from a jelly printmaking lesson, and this is going to create a little bit of color so that I can then, let's speed that up here, then I can add stuff on top. So the final thing I'm going to collage here is this image of an octopus. That is an octopus dinner I had. It was delicious. I felt a little bit guilty as I was eating it because an octopus is one of the smartest creatures. It has like the intelligence of a toddler. Maybe not, but as I was eating it, that's the weird thought I was having. And then finally, I'm going to collage Portugal, the name of what this artwork is all about. So I'm going to let the Mod Podge dry. And again, that's as simple as gluing it down and then adding a coat on top that is even. And let's talk about the waves. So with this, I'm back to the different glue. This is not Mod Podge. It is the Mosaic adhesive. And think of this like glitter. It's actually much easier than you think. You put the glue in the shape of what you want the rocks to be. And what I'm using here is really fun. These are aquarium rocks. They're inexpensive, and they're really great for the more organic shapes that you might have in your mosaic, because the glass pieces are very geometric. They're usually square, triangular, and yes, you can cut them more circular and you can make those rounded shapes. But because these are smaller rounded shapes, it's really great for edges that you don't want to be geometric. I'm time-lapsing here since it's a repeat of the same steps. And now that my collage area is dry, here are some glass pieces that I found, and I'm going to play around with how I want to layer them. Notice that these have curves, so I need to pay very close attention to how they interact with each other so that the curves and the negative space, that's going to be amplified and much more emphasized when we use the grout. Now, this is not Mod Podge. It will dry clear. It is the tile adhesive. It's a little scary at first because it looks cloudy, and you do want to pay attention to the edges. Grout will sneak underneath the tile, so make sure with a paintbrush you don't care that much about, that you extend the glue all the way to the edges and let it squirt out a little bit so you know that it has a safe barrier from the grout. You can see once you put the tiles down, and then you kind of move them around to make sure they're exactly where you want them. And the glue is great for that because it holds it tight, but before the glue dries, you can kind of move it around. So let's put that last one in place, making sure that the negative space, the gaps in the curves of these really beautiful shaped glass. And I did break one of them because I felt like it was too bulky. I do want the mosaic small fragments to show. So you can see there, I did put a gap. And you'll see the effect when it's grouted. You want to not have too big of a shape. Okay, I'm going to go back to the waves. This is a time lapse, as you probably guessed. It's the same technique repeated. Put the glue in the shape you want, throw those stones on there like glitter, and then go from there. Okay, so I'm using this nice orange glass that I found to cover up the words Portugal. I think it will create a really nice area that's emphasized. And this left-hand side is going to be more of a warm color scheme. I think will contrast really nicely with the blue, more ocean look on the other side. So this bird necklace is really special to me. My sister bought it for me, and this is a sailor symbol. It's a swallow, which means return. And sailing was a huge part of the Portuguese economy. A lot of my relatives were sailors, and the love of sailing and the ocean and water is something that's instilled with me throughout my family. So that's a really important message. And also a swallow, so this is also a sailor tattoo. It means to return. And although I'd never been to Portugal, so I wasn't returning, it did feel a sense of returning to something because it really made me think about my family, my father who had recently passed away. And so there was like a symbolism that I have with this bird. I also have it tattooed on my foot. foot, so it's a meaningful symbol. You've been watching me, I almost said tattoo. You've been watching me mosaic the rest of this section. I'm time-lapsing it here because this is the same repeated steps that you saw me do on the top side. I'm just finishing around this one symbol that I'm using, this nice tile that actually did come from Portugal. So I'm doing the exact same technique I did before, focusing on the same color scheme, making sure that edge has the right amount of tile. Now, around the bird that you heard me talking about, I want to be very careful in the colors that I use. I want it to be a nice blue to really pop and catch your eye. And also, this is a really small and difficult shape to mosaic around. So I'm trying to be a little bit more picky with the tiles that not only go across that straight line, but also go in and out the shape of the bird. So with mosaics, really think about your absolutes. And what I mean by that are, what are your hard edges? My hard edge here is that straight line, but then I have the curve line, and then I have the shape of the bird. So you always want to work with those absolute shapes first and then kind of fill in the gaps. So I do have some smaller shapes here. They're that cobalt blue glass that really echoes on the other side. Okay, now let's quickly go ahead and mosaic the other side, focusing on a warmer color scheme. So this time I focused on more of my yellows, my oranges, colors you might find on a beach instead of in the ocean. And I'm also using these seashells that you see right here. These are actually collected from my sister. She went to Portugal a few years ago and brought these back, and they've been just sitting on my kitchen windowsill, and they're beautiful. I didn't use all of them because I love the little glass jar that she gave me, but I wanted to put a few special ones on here. So this side, as you can see, has a little bit more found objects than the other side. The other side is primarily blue, which is those two dominant shapes of the bird and the Portugal tile. Speaking of the Portugal tile, I'm finally going to practice breaking that into at least one smaller piece. Okay, so I'm going to practice on this piece of bathroom tile I don't care about, and this is a different type of tile nipper. So this has a wheel, a tiny little wheel that you can see I'm scoring or putting a mark into the tile. Then you're going to press that nipper right on the line where it lines up, press, and then you're going to break it with a clean line in theory. So that's how you do that. Let's see the difference here. So yes, you could on smaller pieces, but it's not an even cut. And since I want to be very particular with this, I'm going to practice again. So with the wheeled tile nipper, I'm going to make a score mark. Then you take the tile and put it in between horizontally so that it lines up. Well, that is satisfying. So you can see, I want to do a diagonal here, so I'm going to practice this time cutting across at a diagonal with my scoring tool. Then it's harder to line up, so watch what happens. I can't get it perfect, so see how it breaks at a little bit of an uneven edge. It's not the end of the world, but I'm going to practice that again since this Portugal tile is irreplaceable. That didn't do better, but I'm just going to go for it anyway. So I'm going to score the edge. Moment of truth. Boom, clean break. Could I break this more? Absolutely. Am I going to? No. Will I regret it? We'll see when I grout. But I wanted it to have a true mosaic. Should not just be one flat tile. You'd want it to be broken in some way because it's small parts that make a whole image. I'm going to use a whole heck of a lot of glue. I'm going to use this paintbrush to make sure that it extends all the way across. And then once I have that done, I will place my area of emphasis, this beautiful Portuguese tile. And you see this all over Lisbon. It's such a really cool tradition. I love all the nautical themes that you see. It's such a great nod to the capital. And at this point, I need to let everything cure for at least 24 hours before I add my grout. So the next step is to grout, and using grout is very similar to mixing concrete or cement, and the instructions here say you're going to use 3 parts grout to 1 part water. So it is significantly more grouty than it is watery. I am mixing such a tiny amount. I'm using these little measuring cups, and when I say measuring cups, I'm not going to measure. That's terrible advice. You should certainly measure, and if I were doing this with my students, I would be a whole lot more careful than I'm being in this moment. I have not used grout on a mosaic in probably 10 years, maybe 12. And so I'm just going to try and eyeball it. I know from experience that it takes such a small amount of grout to cover this surface, believe it or not. So I filled the cup up just like not even to the halfway point. And you definitely want to use gloves because grout is like concrete and it does get everywhere. So I'm using this paint stirring stick. And I'm adding just a little bit of water. So the recipe is 3-to-1, and I'm stirring with this comically oversized stirring stick for the amount of grout that I'm using. So even if you did measure, which you saw I eyeballed it, knowing the consistency of the grout is really important too, because you might sprinkle a little bit more grout. You might add a little bit more water to get the consistency that you're looking for. So again, I haven't done this in quite a lot of years. I know this is a little too crumbly. It needs a little bit more water, and I think I need more grout. I'm not confident that I can cover my entire surface with the amount of grout that I mixed. So I'm going to take another scoop of grout, and I did not fill it up to the halfway point. And then I'm going to take a clean cup with this water supply. Well, that's not a clean cup. I'm going to take another cup and add a third approximately, because again, I'm not measuring as well. And I'm adding this to the mix. And as long as you do it quickly before your grout starts to set, which it will do in about 15 to 20 minutes, you can add, just like making pancake mix, you can kind of add to your batter. So now I'm stirring it up, and it seems a lot more watery than crumbly, as you can tell. And you don't want that either, because again, you want it to stay between all of the cracks and crevices of your tile and all of your found objects. I'm gonna do this a few times, add a little grout, add a little water until I get that nice consistency that's not too watery and not too crumbly. So let's speed this up to double time until I get it right, and then we can look at the consistency. Now again, if I were doing this in the classroom with students with a larger batch, I would absolutely measure, because this is just a one batch mix. I just was eyeballing it. Is that the best way? I'm sure there's an argument that it's not, but I'm gonna go with it anyway because that's the way I do things. So this is starting to feel a lot better. It has that nice consistency. It's not crumbly, but it's also not like falling off the mixing stick. So that's a good sign that I'm ready to grout. And I'm going to start applying the grout directly to my surface, which is very scary. All right, I'm going to scoop a bunch of my grout on the top section here. Notice I'm wearing gloves. That's going to be super important. And the grout is not watery. It's not running into the cracks and crevices. And it has like a nice, what's a good food consistency? Yogurt? I'm not sure. And then I'm going to take my hands and push it down into my sections. Now, remember, you are using pieces of broken and cut glass. So you need to be super mindful of that. And if you have thicker rubber gloves, that might help. You can also use paintbrushes instead of your hands, and you can also use a rubber squeegee. I'm very confident with my pieces. I know that they're pretty dull, and so I'm just going to use my hands, and that's mostly what my students will use. Some of my students are going to be using glass, like from picture frames, and those students will be given much stricter instructions on how to apply their grout. So again, know what objects you use and just be super careful. Yes, you want to push everything down into the cracks and crevices, but you don't want to cut yourself with all the glass shards that you've been using. Do you see how scary this is? Covering up every single beautiful found object and beautiful piece of glass. Goodbye, hard work. Don't worry, we're gonna let this set after you get it into all your cracks and crevices. And I know it seems like you just ruined everything and it's going to disappear forever, but if you wipe it away before it sets, then it doesn't seep into those cracks and crevices, and you just wipe it away before it dries. So you have to have confidence in the process. Some areas are harder to get to than others. All those little aquarium pebbles that I use, because there's so much more surface area, that's kind of tricky. And so another trick too is to look at your mosaic from all angles and really pay attention to areas that might have more trouble getting into the pieces. And there's nothing wrong also with doing a little patchwork. So save some grout so that if you wipe it away and something didn't set, you can do a small area again. Having a clean work surface is really important. So all this yellow scratch paper that I have is covering my table because again, I am mixing concrete on my desk. And so you want to be very smart about getting rid of all the grout and all of that. Never, ever, ever, ever pour grout down the sink for such obvious reasons. So what I will be doing is adding water to each of these buckets, and then I have a spot outside that's safe to dump the water that has any leftover grout on it. So my gloves are going to be thrown away. The rags I use are mostly going to be thrown away. Just keep in mind, this will kill your drain because it is like mixing concrete. Once you are sure that you've covered up all of your hard work and there is grout in all of the nitty-gritty, let it set for 15 to 20 minutes. You'll see it goes from looking kind of wet with water, and then it has a dry-like look. And I'm going to start using a paper towel to wipe away the first layer of grout. Now, this is going to be something that you're going to see me do a lot. Wipe away, wipe away, wipe away. It still has a hazy, dirty look, and I'm fine with that. Now, a paper towel is not the best choice, but I'm a public school teacher, and I'm always looking for the cheapest solution. Why I'm doing this now is look how dirty this paper towel is getting. So this is like a first layer where you're gonna wipe away, and yes, I sped things up here. You're gonna wipe away, and then we'll use a rag that's a lot more durable as we start to get more of the found objects showing. So I just use the paper towel to start with because it's gonna get messy and I can just throw it away. And then you see I have this rag here, which I will probably end up throwing away, but who knows? I have a million of them. And then I'm taking that and I'm cleaning up, and you can see the top section, a lot of those glass pieces are starting to resurface and come to life. It is such a magical experience. I really love this step. Like I said before, I'm using black grout because I just prefer how that looks. I have students that are planning to use the white grout that I purchased. You can also add dye to your grout. I've never done that before, but I have a couple students who are going to experiment. And I have one student who read online and she's going to put glitter in her grout. So that's really cool. These are things I haven't done, but I'm going to, see how they experiment with it. And if it turns out well, maybe I'll post that on my Instagram. So I flipped it and now I'm doing the bottom section here. I'm using the same rag and you can see the grout has settled, and now as it's lifting from all the spots, it's more crumbly and it has more of that like clumpy sand texture. Again, you can see that the aquarium rocks are giving me the most trouble, and you'll find that found objects are going to clean up very differently than glass because glass is very slippery. The grout should stay in between in the crevices and then slide right off. You're also noticing I'm not using water. I am doing a dry brushing of the grout to get that off. I will be using water later, but I don't want it to break down the grout. I want the grout to fully set and have at least 30 minutes after I wipe it before I use water for cleaning. Grout will set, and it'll set pretty quickly, but not quick enough where you can't remove all of the pieces that you need to. So it does need to set for 15 to 20, completely covering it. And then as you're cleaning it, be mindful that it's still in the process of setting and not to pour a whole bunch of water on there. You can do touch-ups, but it just makes your life more difficult. If your found objects like mine are multi-dimensional and not flat like glass, I'm going to use a needle tool, something I use with ceramics, just to kind of excavate and clean off some of the little seashells that kind of disappeared a little with the grout. Be very careful doing that. You do not want to pick the grout out and leave empty areas. And you can see that now I'm using a sponge with some water on it to clean up these areas. So always start with a dry rag, and then as you're confident that your grout is really set and not gonna be wiped away with the water, you can use a brush or a sponge to get some of the more stubborn areas of grout. And again, if you're using found objects, every area is going to respond to the glue and to the grout differently. So if you've ever tiled a floor, you know that you can't clean it with water because it just keeps looking hazy and hazy and hazy. And that will continue. This won't look completely done the day you grout it. It has like a hazy look to it. And then as your grout continues to set, you keep wiping it with a dry cloth to buff those pieces to make them look beautiful and shiny. Let's speed things up here using that same wet rag just to get all those little nooks and crannies, specifically in the blue aquarium rocks. Let it dry, which is very hard to be patient for, and then take another dry rag and buff it again. And again, you're going to be doing this repetitively until it gets the shine that you want. And it's not going to look, like I said before, absolutely like hang it on the wall ready until everything's really cured. And it takes a lot of wiping away to get the dust of the grout not to have a film or residue over the top of your surfaces. Another thing to think about are your edges. So I use black grout, and so that got everywhere. So I would paint my edges black. It might be fun to paint them blue or something orange, something to really contrast, but really pay attention to where the grout's getting on the edges of your board or whatever surface you're using as well. I'm going back to my needle tool just to make sure these little shells that I added are showing up, but I don't want to pick the grout out. I don't want to do a redo. I actually can't believe that I'm not having to glue more pieces down. That sometimes when you grout, pieces will fly off and you'll have to re-glue it. And most of my found objects just aren't buried. So I'm just being a little picky on these important found objects that I use. And then I'll go back to the same steps I used before. I'm going to do one more clean with the sponge with water, and then I'll let it dry and I'll buff it again. So again, lots of wetting it down to clean, letting it dry, buffing with a rag. Do that until you are happy with it. All right, glue pieces back on as needed. There's nothing wrong if something fell off. I had a couple little aquarium rocks fall off while I was aggressively wiping with my rag. And let's say you have an object that you wanted to protect from the grout, something that you wanted to add kind of last minute on top of your pieces. Now, I'm on the fence about whether I'm glad I did this or not. I could have just grouted this necklace completely, and it would have been kind of cool where some of it would have been visible and some of it's covered in grout, but I decided to add it on top of the pieces so it really stood out visually. There's nothing better than a curvy line to lead your eye around the composition. And since my area of emphasis is down at the bottom, and then it trails your eye from the word Portugal down the blue wave, down to my bird, and then finally, like you needed help seeing it, but to that giant Portugal tile. So I'm just gonna speed things up here. It's the same steps. Remember, your glue dries clear as you saw, and I'm just gonna piece this one thing, this necklace kind of around my found object so it really looks like it's a part of the composition. So I'm just gonna do that here, and I'm so happy with how this turned out. Look at my collage pieces and how you can see the collage underneath. It has so much unity, even though there's like a whole bunch of other separate pieces. So thank you so much for sticking around and making art with me. This was such a sentimental and fun way to explore not only making mosaics, but how to use found objects to remember an important event in my life. If you're interested in more tutorials, check these out. Find me on Instagram at thatartteacher_Machado, and find my website thatartteacher.com for full-length lesson plans, student examples, and all of my resources are totally free.